think, on an odd way, the music that I was doing when I first was doing fine in the U.S. I mean, it was good, but when I went to England, it was like, oh, these are my people. They got it immediately.
That's
and
cool.
So, I haven't listed. These are movies, but British television has always been a big influence, and their sense of comedy is really strong, odd, kind of defeatist in many ways.
Yeah.
But that's
yeah,
true.
I mean, you have Barry London, that's set in England. You have Chariots of Fire, the 24-Hour Party People is in Manchester.
Right.
Let's see, what else is on your list? We could say Lord of the Rings is set in England. It just feels like
That's
it.
right. It's definitely a British writer.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about what I see on this list, which is a fight between art and commerce.
Yeah.
And when I looked at your top 10, I went, well, here's the film school films, and then here's the popular films. Here's the commercial films like Lord of the Rings, Tootsie. Fargo's a little bit on the edge. Chariots of Fire would be more mainstream. And then there's ones that are, the art films, the ones that are definitely there for artistry's sake. So I see a little bit of a play between art and commerce in what your top 10 shows.
Right.
How has that played in your life? Like, I know that's a tension, and I know providing for your family has been an ultimate, value in all this too, just like in The Bicycle Thief.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about that and how you view it, and is that kind of has that been an antagonist? The necessary need to, let's say, be a Tootsie in order to put yourself out there and do your art and have to play a woman in order to really do your craft, make your living, get the girl, everything else, everything that's assumed in this life, and yet at the same time there's something underneath it that's he wants to be a serious actor and so tell me a little bit about that.
That's where the naivety comes in is it's not that I'm unaware of commercial considerations. It's just that I just can't let those lead. And
so it hasn't been really much of a struggle.
No, it probably should have been. Because that's part of why punk rock screwed up my life is because it's not only that's not supposed to be a concern, it's that you were supposed to disdain that, right? So it's not just
so you're supposed to be the rebel.
That's the enemy, right? Is commerciality, and so if you are successful, it's like, well, what did you do to sell out? So that's I'm not saying that's a good thing. That's probably destructive, but that's probably there way more than I would care to admit. Is that some sense of if it's not pushing some kind of envelope or barriers, it's like, why bother making it?
Yeah. And all of these films were by directors who were definitely pushing envelopes.
Who would have entrusted Peter Jackson to take on Lord of the Rings? I mean, that on the surface looked like insanity. I don't know if you've seen some of Peter Jackson's earlier work, but he's a crazy man. He was wildly talented, but he did like Dead Again. I don't know if you saw that, like the craziest horror movie you've ever seen. Like, that was obviously the right choice, but who would have ever thought he'd do that? Vittorio De Sica, when he did The Bicycle Thief, those are all non-professional actors that he cast. I learned the hard way. That's not always a good idea. Chariots of Fire was directed by a guy who just did really nice commercials before. Rushmore and Wes Anderson, this was his first movie that really had his aesthetic. It was a little bit there in his first movie, Bottle Rocket, but Rushmore was kind of his first, what we think of as his Wes Anderson movie. Mm-hmm. But all these people are, on some level, were pushing the envelope. 400 Blows. Truffaut was a film critic. He'd never made a movie before. Fargo, the Coen brothers have ever done anything that was straight up. Probably not until True Grit was the first movie they did that was just awesome, but straight up commercial as well. And 24 Hour Party People was directed by Michael Winterbottom, a guy who's known for taking on oddball projects and doing all kinds of experimental work and doing things for a fraction of what they would normally cost otherwise. So yeah, almost all these projects are representative of somebody, the director or the source material, pushing some kind of envelope, I'd say.
Talk to me about desire. So each of these films, characters have strong desires. Which one do you look at and go, that kind of resonate with that desire?
Dustin Hoffman's character in Tootsie, he's just so driven to get this thing done. I mean, he's driven to star in his friend in Bill Murray's play about Love Canal, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a point where he has a showdown with his agent, who's played by Sidney Pollack, who was directing the movie, right? Who did an awesome job. And Sidney Pollack says, "No one will hire you," right? And then you just see in Dustin Hoffman's face, "Oh yeah," and he goes out and gets a job as a woman, right? So I get some kind of perverse pleasure of being presented with, the thought, like you cannot do this. Mm-hmm. Oh yeah? Yeah, we'll see about that, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes they're right, or sometimes you can do it, and it turns out nobody else is interested in what you do. But I really like that. There's a lot of people who are, I guess, innovating on some level here too.
Yeah.
The guy in Chariots of Fire ran he just had an oddball way of running that nobody had seen before. In Rushmore, he's coming up with all these bizarre clubs that nobody has ever thought of doing.
Yep.
The guy in 24 Hour Party People is establishing a record label in a city that doesn't have a music industry, with a bunch of bands who were complete innovators. They'd never done anything like that before.
That's good. And can you admit to the fact that you are an innovator?
I aspire to be an innovator. I don't think that's for other people to decide, but that's certainly an aspiration.
An aspiration.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you think about the phrase "prove something to the world"? So, in other words, you could say, like you said with Tootsie, where it's like, oh yeah,
right.
Yeah. How does the phrase "prove something to the world" strike you?
Well, when I backed into starting a record label because the band I was working with needed a home and didn't trust anybody, and so the band was Sixpence None the Richer, and one of the songs that we recorded that I produced was a song called "Kiss Me," and
I love that song.
Being on an independent label in Nashville, Tennessee. Anybody who knows anything about the music business would say, well, no, you can't have a pop hit. That would be impossible, because that's unprecedented, right? And somehow it happened. It was a worldwide, pop hit. That was a great moment, just because that shouldn't have happened, and all kinds of things had to come together to make it happen. But I loved every aspect around that story. There was so many forces of antagonism fighting against that ever happening, and somehow it still happened.
Sounds a little bit like Lord of the Rings. Like there's no way this little hobbit's going to...
Well, yeah, that's funny,
take, this ring to Mordor,
Right.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, that's good, because, that's part of the beauty of Lord of the Rings, is they pick a little hobbit to do the biggest job, and that's kind of how it was with Sixpence. They were a little band, very young, very.
So you were
naive.
Gandalf, basically, in that situation.
Yeah, there you go. Well, I like that. And they had great talent, but no mechanism for getting it out to the world. But they were willing to do the work, and they were steadfast in staying after it. And that's a good analogy for what they pulled off.
Do you think that a lot of your movies are really character studies? I would say there's a quote in one of your films of "This is an experiment in human behavior." Is that what you long to do with your films? So you've made a few films as a filmmaker. What is kind of the passion you have to use film, and how would you describe your voice as a filmmaker?
Yeah, I realized this fairly recently. Like you said, they're all in the lead characters are in over their head. They get put into an environment where they have to get schooled, and there's usually some kind of education component involved, either implicit or explicit, and I think they're a little slow on the uptake. They think they understand things, and they don't actually understand things, and that's pretty much how I've lived life.
It describes your last film was Blue Like Jazz, and
right.
I think that's a great description of that plot, wouldn't you say?
Yeah.
A very naive main character who goes into a world that's a little bit over his head.
Yes, right.
And things kind of spin out of control in that.
Right.
Some of the moral dealings he has to deal with, a little bit of his principles and his morals in that, his convictions in that.
Right.
And at the end, he finds a sense of resolution just in understanding his humanity and understanding who he is, and in relationship to his faith.
Right.
Is that the story that you like to tell? It sounds like it is.
Yeah.
Is there any part of it that I'm missing?
No, I think that's those are probably the stories that I'm drawn to.
Mm-hmm.
And every day, that's one of the beautiful things about the gospel is you recognize if you're open to it, that your own sinfulness and selfishness and foolishness, and the characters in the films I've made, they have to do that. Mm-hmm. It's a process of realizing, oh wait, I've got some things kind of messed up here.
Yeah.
I got to figure some stuff out.
Yeah. Tell me about what film on this list, and this is an unfair question because I believe they're all very Christian.
Right.
We're going to take Chariots of Fire and Lord of the Rings off your list.
Okay. Yep.
Because they're undeniably, one's written by a Christian, the other one has a Christian character in it.
Yeah, right.
So now you're faced with your top 10.
Yeah.
Which one of these would you say is the most Christian?
I think probably The Bicycle Thief.
And of course, the next question is why.
The thief steals the man's bike, and which he's pawned, the family linens to get this. He's so desperate for it. Robs so much from this man and his family, and we. It's almost like it's a very poor version of the garden beforehand, and then
So you see it as a
sin
really
comes into the
strong
world.
metaphor,
Right? Yeah, I think
of something
so.
being stolen from us.